Good day and welcome to our session. I'm Tom McIntyre, Dr. Mac as I'm known to most, developer of the Behavior Advisor website where you'll find what to do and how to do it advice on classroom management and the promotion of positive behavior change. Speaking of positive behavior change and ensuring that our learners develop and display appropriate classroom behavior, let's learn about our research-proven behavior change model and its practices and procedures. But before we do, please pause the recording and consider the queries on your screen. You're back. Super. I suspect that very few of you have the urge to do any of those things. You have ingrained habits or beliefs, and the payoffs are okay. So, knowing that a positive payoff, a beneficial outcome, strengthens our behavior pattern, which two types of consequences build behaviors? Yes, reinforcement and the two different types of reinforcement. We're probably all very familiar with positive reinforcement. We show an action and there's a beneficial outcome. Something desirable comes to us. And then there's the other type of reinforcement, negative reinforcement. Attend to the second word, reinforcement, something that strengthens our behavior, something beneficial happens. With negative reinforcement, we show a behavior and we keep something negative from happening. Or if we're in an undesirable situation and we show an action and escape from it, escape from that negative thing, that's negative reinforcement of our behavior. It feels good to avoid or escape a punishing or a negative situation. Now, you haven't even contemplated doing these things that were on that initial slide. In the TMC model, you would be described as being in the pre-contemplation stage. If you've begun thinking about these as, maybe they're not such a bad idea, then you've moved into the contemplation stage. If you look up a recipe for a cicada stir fry or a cicada tetrazzini, you're now in the preparation stage, getting ready to engage in an action. And if you purchase and gather ingredients to start to prepare them for cooking, then you're at sort of an in-between stage with the mix of preparation and action. Now, if you engage in cooking and eating the dish, you're in the action stage. If you decide to make it a staple in your diet and serve it to guests at potluck gatherings, you're then in the maintenance stage. We will continue on and explain these in further detail and how they relate to helping kids make better behavior choices. Indeed, this is what's on our dance card today. We'll engage in a quick review of what is meant by externalizing or acting out behavior. We'll have an overview of the aforementioned model so that you know where our suggestions for practice are coming from. Then, addressing what our research is telling us about how to tweak it for educational settings and changing the school-based behavior patterns of our students with disruptive behavior disorders and learners with other persistent acting out behavior profiles. And finishing with strategies for helping your contrary learners make better behavior choices. So then, allow me to officially welcome you to the session that promises to improve your behavior management and social emotional learning knowledge and skills with students who display persistent, inappropriate, at least inappropriate to the school setting. It may be quite appropriate for other settings, but persistent, inappropriate behavior response patterns in an educational setting. During and after this session, via a handout that will be made available to you, you'll be able to make a definite positive impact on students who display behaviors on all three tiers of the positive behavior interventions and supports model, the PBIS model. So let's get underway, immerse ourselves in the Transtheoretical Model for Change and its adaptations for utilization in the schools. What could be the reason that a research-proven or evidence-based intervention works wonderfully with one youngster, just like in the research studies, but fails to work with another? Well, number one, if the youth sees no reason to change, no reason to exit that present behavior pattern, then we have an intervention-resistant student. Or two, do they believe that the behavior that we're promoting provides a better payoff than the present behavior pattern? We look at the function of a behavior, the reason, the purpose, the drive, what is behind that behavior, what's motivating that persistent behavior pattern under certain circumstances. And if the intervention that we recommend isn't addressing that same function, that same need for attention or for power or for sensory input, then that intervention isn't going to be effective. And do they think that they are capable of developing the new behavior pattern that we're promoting? Or number three, perhaps part of that belief in our promise that things will be better if they engage in the new action patterns is that's dependent on who is making that promise. As the old saying goes, you gotta like the messenger if you're going to listen to the message. When we refer to externalizing behavior patterns, we're referring to children and youth who may or may not, depending on the circumstances, qualify for a DSM-5-TR, a Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of the American Psychiatric Association, or ICD, International International Classification of Diseases, diagnoses such as oppositional defiant disorder, conduct disorder, intermittent explosive disorder, and or disruptive mood dysregulation disorder, maybe even dependent personality disorder. But certainly they display pronounced and persistent acting out behavior patterns that concern school personnel. Dissocial personality disorder from the ICD would also be included. Behavior patterns described by one or more of these descriptors. A number of my colleagues come to mind, but I digress. So, The often heard question in our schools: what could be the reason, again, that a research-proven or evidence-based intervention works wonderfully with one dysocial young person, but fails to positively impact another learner? Even our powerful procedures and programs that you see listed here, well, along with a lack of fidelity and consistency uh, to our behavior change plan, could the old adage that you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink, be pertinent in addressing this question? To follow up on the theme of that old adage with a poorly worded one, might our intervention-resistant horses need to be thirsty for the behavior change water in order to partake of it? There's a model that promotes this view when working with individuals in need of positive behavior change. But would this model be applicable to children and youth in educational settings, especially those students whose action and reaction patterns violate school regulations, classroom decorum, and personal comfort and safety of oneself and others? Let's take a look at this theoretical framework, the Transtheoretical Stages of Change model. We know from many hundreds, yes, hundreds of well-designed research studies in clinical settings with individuals with errant, maladaptive, and antisocial behavior problems that this model is effective in changing behavior. Years ago, I read a random article crossing my professional reading feed. It was about a model for explaining why intervention strategies work or don't, and how to better assure that they do. I read the document authored by the psychologist shown above and said to myself, whoa, this model applies to our kids with firmly embedded acting out behavior profiles. So I gathered a research team, and we set out to determine whether this one well-known clinical model could indeed be applied to the school environment with students who display persistent, externalizing, acting out behavior patterns. The TMC model, developed by the psychologists Prochaska and DiClemente, was derived from their research with clients in their practices and has since been proven effective, as I said, in hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of large-scale, well-conducted research studies of medical patients and clinical clients who were engaged in self-harmful behavior repertoires that were highly resistant to change. Today, a vast multitude of research studies supports the effectiveness of this framework with a wide variety of problematic behaviors. Indeed, it is now the predominant intervention model in clinical settings promoting behavior change. As we, talking about our research team, continued our review of the literature and engaged in our research endeavor, we continue to believe, and do believe now, that this model can be adapted for use with severely involved children and youth. In fact, it's been successful in changing the behavior of adolescent delinquent youth in 2 studies. But now we wish to take that TMC model into educational environments, a setting where researchers of this model have not yet tread. And indeed, the originators of the Transtheoretical Model stated that research needs to be conducted with populations in settings other than clinical ones. Our research team has picked up the gauntlet that was thrown down as we engage in our validation of instruments and venture into the schools. The Transtheoretical Model, so called because you can continue to adhere to your favorite intervention model, applied behavior analysis, the cognitive behavior theoretical model, cognitive behavior, socio-ecological, psychoeducational, whichever, and it intertwines nicely with any and all of them. In its standard form, it's a stages model, with movement into each stage being dependent upon success in the previous stage. The TMC model identifies the stage of willingness and readiness to change one's maladaptive ways and provides the general framework, the general avenue of approach for advancing the individual to the next higher stage. In a school setting, you or the IEP team would plug in preferred strategies that meet the focus of those recommended approaches for a particular stage in order to promote advancement to the next stage of motivation and readiness to change errant ways for the better. Now, consider taking a screenshot of this developing screen and then print it out and have it available for the activities that are going to pop up during this session. At any moment in time, most of us exist in the pre-contemplation stage, very much like our initial slide where we asked you to consider engaging in new behaviors. We have our habitual ways of addressing recurring situations. It takes something quite significant to shake up our world and give rise to the consideration of other views and other ways of doing things. We are, as they say, creatures of habit. Imagine if I asked you to change your political views to opposing positions, exchange your religious practices for those of another belief system, or replace the holidays traditions that you celebrate with your family with the ones observed by my kinfolk. Odds are you would continue with your standard practices. Even considering change, as in the contemplation stage, is quite an undertaking. Perhaps the benefits of change are recognized as being superior to those received when showing the present reaction pattern. Or maybe the person reaches rock bottom, so to speak, with the present behaviors and finally realizes that the actions they're using are blocking access to a better life. Now, actually sketching out a plan for change is a monumental step. Making the decision to undertake change despite the effort that's going to be involved and the possibility of failure is a precarious position in which to place oneself. Now, leaving behind the deeply ingrained automatic habitual ways is nothing to minimize. Humans show behaviors because there's benefits to doing so. If there wasn't a payoff for displaying our actions, we never would have adopted these behaviors in the first place and then kept them. Leaving those responses behind when they are now stimulus response type reactions, mechanical in nature, and now responding differently to recurring circumstances is a difficult undertaking, to say the least. It is a bold move to attempt the change of one's ways, given that the present actions have been a significant part of one's life, integral to it. And then maintaining that new response pattern is a tenuous endeavor at best. The allure of past response patterns is Lorelei-like, threatening to crash one back up onto the behavioral shoals. The replacement behaviors feel awkward and ill-fitting when they're first attempted. Their clumsy displays might not bring the promised benefits at this point. And as we see at the bottom there, the standard clinical version of the TMC model has relapses where these are to be expected, and they refer to the return to the original aberrant behavior pattern, while witnessing periodic relapses are an expectation for those of us who are mentoring our children or youth. To the previously enthused individual, these setbacks can be demoralizing. Failure can destroy one's motivation to continue to attempt to metamorphose oneself. So, taking these stages and the relapse phenomenon into account, this is how the system operates. However, our research, our team's research, is indicating that there are two types of relapse or backsliding. That one can fall back from a stage just a little bit to a previous stage, maybe two stages down, that the regression that we see, regression is a smaller backsliding, and where relapse is a return to the original pre-contemplation stage, where we then have to go through the various processes to lift them up again and remotivate them. There is some criticism in the professional literature regarding the model's separate stage structure that was shown in that last slide. Our research aligns with that criticism of the distinct stages. There has been criticism of the standard TMC model's precise delineation of the stages, and various authors have pointed out that individuals just don't suddenly jump from one level of motivation to another. So we are coming to view the behavior change process as being a transitional continuum upon which a transparent overlay with marked stages can be placed. But there is change both within and between those standardized original model arbitrarily assigned segments called stages. We also see the preparation stage that was identified in the previous model, the original model for clinical settings. We're finding that in educational settings, it isn't just a mental preparation, as in the clinical settings, but also our students, our learners need practice in the new behaviors if they are going to be able to demonstrate them as they move into the action stage to show some proficiency and accomplishment in those behaviors that we would like to have replaced and changed for the better. So we see in the preparation stage more than just motivation. Our kids need training to be able to show those skills that aren't presently part of their behavioral repertoire. Typically, social emotional learning and social skills instruction is what we use at the various levels of positive behavior intervention supports, the PBIS model. And based on our research team's efforts, we're also coming to disagree with the traditional model's view that a person exists in only one stage at a time. Perhaps it's more like a ladder in which we can exist in varying mental states and inconsistency of physical actions from 1 minute to the next minute and day to day. Take, for example, an acting out student in a self-contained classroom or an alternative school. He sees no need to change his ways despite educators seeing that need. What stage are we talking about here? Hey, this works fine for me. Take a long walk off a short pier. I don't feel like changing my ways. They're just fine, thank you. Which stage? That's right, pre-contemplation. However, he participates in the social skills lessons and the social emotional learning activities in order to get a decent grade, avoid the penalty of a poor grade, but also to spend time with peers, or in the best of all educational worlds, because he feels connected to the teacher. Which stage is that? Preparation with a bit of action as we're trying out different things and displaying different behaviors. This is something we'll touch on in just a minute. Now, the same student on the same day is in the lunchroom and jokingly displays exaggerated versions of the behavior that were practiced back in the classroom or the counselor's office, and doing so with the cafeteria lady dishing out the food. Oh, thank you so much, Mrs. Smith. Oh, that food looks so good, and thank you for serving it to me. Yes, exaggerated, contrived, and he's doing it to make, his friends laugh who are in the line behind him, laugh at his antics. But there's practice there of the behaviors we've been working on. Which stage? Yes. Pat yourself on the back and the brain. You correctly identified the display as being in the action stage in a real life situation, not hypothetical, like back in the classroom or the office. Now, with this practice and socially reinforced displays, our student then begins to ponder, maybe it would be a good decision to engage in adopting these ways as my new behavior response pattern. I don't think I'll be using it out on the street corner. I don't think I'll be using it at the community rec center after school, but I think in certain settings, this would be a wise choice to switch out my ways. Which stage? That's right. You nailed it. Contemplation. Now, this scenario that was just presented doesn't follow the separate stages lockstep sequence of the traditional model. Whatever the stage, people are generally hesitant in deciding whether to attempt to enter the next phase of change, or instead go back down the staircase to where it's more comfortable socially and interpersonally. We're thinking now that rather than the latter analogy that our team initially developed, our team is now considering the idea that behavioral progress in our students might be more akin to a climbing gym. Progress, as shown in the previous slide, doesn't typically occur in a straight line. Change doesn't occur in a straight line like in a ladder. Indeed, the path of change is typically askew. Not taking that straight up the ladder approach. Sometimes, progress is slow and grueling when we first undertake our attempts. In the pre-contemplation stage, the learners are uninterested in engaging in the behavior that's exhibited by others. However, with our stage-focused interventions, we can spark interest in the ways deemed to be appropriate in our classrooms and our educational programs. Contemplation stage strategies convince our student to participate in the pro-social change process by getting mentally and behaviorally ready for engaging in the new patterns of action and reaction. Our preparation stage interventions spur the learner to make those first precarious attempts at the new ways. And with our support and action stage strategies, the learner becomes more comfortable and proficient in displaying the indicated actions. But trying new things is as we said, tenuous undertaking at best. These novel new ways go against the grain of the habitual ones. They don't feel natural, so to speak, and the temptation to return to those former ways is ever present. In the best of all scenarios, the learner eventually fully adopts the new ways for the educational setting, but usually after having experienced a number of regressions and relapses. But now, comfort and proficiency in the new response pattern are present. But back to those learners at the lower levels. How do we motivate our students with the errant actions to move to higher levels of engagement in the behavior change process and then solidify those new ways? Progressing through the stages of change is dependent on three determinants. Here are the three. First, the processes. What are the processes? These are general approaches into which we plug our preferred interventions if and when those preferred interventions match the nature of the approach, the process that is indicated for a particular stage of change. Interventionists must also be aware of which processes are indicated for which stages of the model. We're going to be addressing those in just a moment. The second determinant: individuals must possess a firm belief in themselves, self-confidence, known as self-efficacy. The confidence, the trust in themselves that they can continue to be successful in their behavior change attempts. Our support helps them develop this trust in themselves. And the third influencer, the third determinant that promotes change, making a conscious choice to move forward. Something we'll find out is known as decisional balance. Weighing the pros and cons, looking at the faith in oneself's ability to make a good attempt at the next stage, at the next more difficult task. Making that conscious choice to move forward based on success due to our well-developed and implemented support and the resultant self-assurance that has emerged because of it. To promote behavioral success, that willingness and readiness to move upward in the behavior change process to the final goal, interventionists like us must use different approaches, different processes at different stages. And you see that when a student is in the pre-contemplation stage, hey, I don't have any problem. What are you talking about changing my ways? We need to create an awareness of the benefits of change. And we start to work on their value system and their beliefs, eroding the present ones and developing an interest in the ones that we're promoting. And when we've got the student thinking at the contemplation stage, maybe I do have a problem, and maybe these other ways are worth considering. We have certain approaches, certain processes that are indicated for the contemplation stage. And those avenues of approach, those processes, if we implement them at another stage, ain't going to work. There are certain ways that we intervene at each stage. When we've moved the student into the preparation stage, where the student is mentally considering jumping into action, but also is preparing, practicing to use the new ways out there in the real world, not just in our classroom where we're preparing them. If we use the correct interventions aligned with the processes for the preparation stage, the student will engage in action. And with our support, but weaning that support because we want this student to think more and more, I can do it, that I can walk that tightrope on my own. Now, certainly we're always there as the net in case they fall, but we continue to support them as far back as we're able. We're still encouraging and all, but we're starting to wean them from our support as they move into the maintenance stage. I can do this, and I can do it on my own. Well, here you see 9 of the 10 processes and a description of each of them. Now, this table, as I said, lists 9 of the 10 processes or approaches or general avenues of what we plan to do for each of these processes. We'll align them with stages in just a second, but want to get to that second one. It seems that consciousness raising was left off the list. Consciousness, easy for me to say, consciousness raising involves creating an awareness of acceptable pro-social behavior that would replace the unacceptable educational situations, might be acceptable in other situations, but developing an awareness of the acceptable pro-social behavior that will be replacing the unacceptable response pattern. Now, each of these processes that you see are assigned to a singular stage of change. Remember that traditional model, 5 steps of change. And there are 2 of these processes assigned to each of the stages. We'll get more into it. Oh, yes, here we are. There's the 10 processes, a tensum of general treatment approaches as they're aligned with a particular stage. And you see them here in the rows that are above and below the stages that are identified, color-coded to match the stage for which they're indicated. But also you notice that in the stages, those stages indicated, while we have a transparent overlay of the stages, we see that that fading, that transition of color, indicating that the stages aren't um, distinct, but rather they blend into one another. So if these strategies in the top and bottom rows, above and below the stages, were used at another stage of motivation or readiness, they'd be ineffective. They might even be counterproductive because they don't meet the needs of the individual at that point in their change process. Using the TMC model as it applies to schools, we might prescribe the building of positive student-teacher relationships for the pre-contemplation stage, and the use of encouragement and the identification of benefits of the change in the contemplative stage. Role-playing of the replacement behaviors would be appropriate during the preparation stage. Oh, and that positive student-teacher relationship, it really is important at all stages. We want to build it, maintain it, and strengthen it. Educators and other interventionists often use a preferred practice that has worked well for some of our charges previously, most likely because they were well aligned with for the approach that matched their stage of motivation to change, the process designated for that state of change. However, if it fails to align with the processes indicated for another individual at another stage of preparedness and motivation to change, it'll be unsuccessful. In the early stages, the indicated processes are directed at influencing and preparing the mindset. While we continue to address the cognitive aspects in the later stages, we're more so centered on the building of observable skills and developing proficiency in their display. A learner in the early stages must be mentally prepared and convinced that positive behavior change is both desirable and achievable. Having an admired and respected helper and mentor, that's you, enhances the chances that that state of mind will develop. Now, we're still involved in the later stages when the learner rolls up the sleeves and gets to work on change. When the learner has a mentor and supporter, self-efficacy builds and decisional balance is tipped toward motivation to give it a try, to continue to advance one's skills. Essential in the preparation stage, it continues to be important throughout the sequence. Now, certainly we As I've said earlier, we withdraw as much as possible as the students' self-efficacy rises, their belief in themselves increases. But although we're weaning them from our support in order to allow for that strengthening of independence, we remain as their net while they perform on the high wire. I see I've mixed a distant cousin metaphor to the photo on the screen, but we continue on. Yeah. It's important to understand the that unrelated penalties and the use of coercion is never part of the processes of change. We lure the student into change. We do not demand and push. Compliance via coercion does not win them over at the level of the heart and the mind. Punishment builds resentment, rebellion, retaliation. Our learners, having experienced our punishments, our penalties for failing to try this new thing or advance, they develop an immunity to it, requiring us to use more of what already isn't working and further injuring the student-teacher relationship that is so important to developing and strengthening the desire to change. In fact, why not make the positive student-teacher relationship the fourth dimension for change, the fourth essential component? Something to consider. But the old adage applies when we punish learners into submission, if we're even able to do so. When the cat's away, the mice will play. We have the greatest and perhaps sole chance to positively impact the target behaviors when we implement strategies aligned with the processes associated with that learner's stage of readiness and willingness to change at that moment. Accompanying the processes and decisional balance is that self-efficacy, believing in oneself and trusting in oneself enough to load the "I'll give it a try" tray of the balance scale. Yes. A major contribution of the work of Albert Bandura, self-efficacy. With success due to our support, as needed, and the provision of correctly aligned interventions with the processes, the individual's self-concept builds. That enhanced self-image and self-esteem, that belief in oneself that we call self-efficacy, leads to undertaking and accomplishing those next tasks in behavioral advancement. Indeed, success and self-efficacy co-construct each other. Now, let's talk now a little bit more about that third dimension, that decisional balance that we quickly passed through previously. It's making the decision to stay at the present level of ability, or say, this ain't working for me, and the temptation is too great, and regressing or relapsing, or hopefully moving forward into new and more demanding situational challenges. Weighing the perceived positive and negative outcomes, that's decisional balance. Decisional balance is especially important at the early stages of the model, the Transtheoretical Model, but it's still present later in the change process when deciding to take the newly learned skill into a different setting and circumstances that are perceived to be more threatening, more challenging. We put our finger on the scale, so to speak, with our stage aligned interventions that are designed to tip the scales toward the side of deciding to move to the next stage or the next phase of behavior change. One approach that is especially important in the early stages is engaging in mentor guided instructors discussions with the changer, the learner, the kid, and we address the pros and the cons of each choice. Now, in that 4 boxes that we see there, okay, notice the direction of the arrows. We talk about, well, what are the pros of staying where you are and keeping your present behavior pattern? Okay, let's get that out of the way and let's find out why you are showing that behavior pattern. But what are some of the drawbacks? I mean, when you display that, what happens? Well, I get in trouble. I go to the office. The other kids make fun of me. You don't seem to enjoy that. And okay, and then we move into box number 3 at the bottom right corner. And well, what's something bad that could come from taking this new action? Well, my present friends might reject me. They think it's funny. And I can't do this, out there outside of school. And so we talk about how behavior change might not be the best thing. But we follow up with box number 4 at the top right. There's a psychological phenomenon that applies here. Humans tend to attend to and remember the last topic that was discussed. So in this case, it's embedding the benefits of change into the mind of the focused learner, our changer, our student. Here's another form that can be used in helping kids decide to move to a higher stage when they're in the pre-contemplation or the contemplation stage. We have them consider the pros and cons of their present ways versus the suggested ways. When we're considering the important social connections the student has, their health, and more as they assess the impact on their present and their future. So via our knowledge of the model and the assessment instruments that our research team has developed, you use those and you to ascertain the learner's stage of readiness to achieve. We educators then identify the processes aligned with that stage. In the third step, we're selecting preferred interventions that align with those processes. That's our next task. Those of you who adhere to the ABA model will implement different strategies than professionals who abide by the psychoeducational, cognitive behavioral, ecological, social cognitive, or other theoretical orientations. Remember, we said that the name transtheoretical means that the processes, the steps, the trans-theoretical model allows you to use your preferred strategies as long as they fit nicely into the processes that are used for the stage in which the student is situated presently. And then we implement those interventions with fidelity. One of the biggest reasons for failure of our behavior change attempts is that different people are intervening in different ways, or we're not being consistent in following the plan. However, no matter which theoretical model on which you hang your hat, the prerequisite for success is that positive adult-student relationship. And there are other contributors, of course, things that we need to include in our plan and our way of presenting that plan. We should be using effective versus ineffective praise and positive recognition. Praise has been studied. Look up the words, the work of Carol Dweck and the work of others. There's probably been 10, 15 different types of praise that have been studied, and only a couple have been found to produce more of the behavior that has just been positively recognized. Just quickly speaking, descriptive praise, rather than saying things like, oh, good, great, oh, that's very nice. What's good, great, or very nice? Be specific. Oh, I see you use more adjectives and adverbs, those color words. Wow, this makes your composition much more entertaining and gripping for the reader. Be specific. Um, Use encouragement, and that helps to build the student-teacher relationship, saying, I know you can do it. And when the kid falls down and says, I can't do that, we use um, the important response. We use the response of yet. Oh, you can't do it yet, but you will. Remember how you learned to regroup in the math problems? That was tough, but you mastered it. And you and me working as a team, we're going to master this too. I know you can do it. I believe in you. I believe in you. I believe in you is the message we give the kid to help support their self-efficacy development. We use effective phrasing. We avoid negative you messages, especially when combined with the word why. Why are you doing that right now? Why are you doing that again? We use I messages. We talk about what needs to be done versus what's going wrong. I need you right now to get back to your seat, take out the assignment, and get to work. I know that that'll happen. I believe in you. I believe in you. I believe in you. Instead of pointing out the penalties, if you don't get back in the seat, you're losing recess. We state it as the positive, what can be kept by showing the appropriate behavior. You need to get back to your seat so that you can enjoy recess with the others. The benefits of compliance. And a three-step direction using the magic word. Now! I mean, please. And then specifically what we want done, the second step, and following up with a thank you. By saying thank you, it promotes the message that we know they can do it and that they will do it. When we give criticism, let's start off first of all with something positive and end on a positive note. So it would be something along the lines of, wow, that's a great introductory sentence in your composition. However, I don't see it followed up upon. I mean, Typically, there's that captivating first sentence, but then an explanation and elaboration upon it. Oh, but again, great introductory sentence. It makes the reader want to read more. Now, help the reader understand why you use that first sentence. Okay, so it's a suggestion sandwich. Start out with a positive, end with a positive, sandwiching the constructive criticism. And then our unconditional support as a mentor of this learner, what is known as symptom separation. Separate the behavior from the kid. Oh, I hate that behavior, but I'm going to work with this student. I'm going to work with this learner to replace that behavior that irks me with a new behavior pattern. So, what does all this mean for the schools? Gosh, let's look at some of the ideas for kids in the pre-contemplation stage. Let's consider students who are of the most concern to us and bring us together today. And one of the strategies that we can use with kids in the pre-contemplation stage is our ABC analysis. A's, as you know, standing for antecedent. What comes before the B, the behavior, and what comes after it, the C, the consequence. We know, as we stated earlier, that behaviors continue to be shown because the consequence that follows it is reinforcing in some way. It either brings something desirable to the person, the display of that behavior, or it helps them avoid or escape something negative, something undesirable, negative reinforcement. So when we see a certain behavior, there it is, there's the B, and we say, well, what came just before it? Because the antecedent, the A, is what set off that behavior. The last stimulus before the behavior. There might have been some stimuli before the A, what we call setting events. Uh, the student, uh, there's food insecurity in the home, and the student didn't have breakfast, was walking to school um, after the rain had stopped, but a car going by splashed a puddle near the curb onto the student's clothes. Other kids made fun of that kid. And so when the student got there, the ability to manage stress and tension and disappointment, the pot's almost full and it overflows at something what seems innocuous to us, just asking the student to engage in an assignment. And the student shows this refusal behavior. Gosh, why would asking the kid to start the assignment result in such an explosive behavior? Ah, before the antecedent, the final stimuli, our direction, a whole lot happened, the setting events. Okay. And when we see that behavior, we consider not just the antecedent and the setting events that come before the antecedent, but we also consider, well, what happened afterwards? Because that's what's keeping the behavior going. But I gave the kid a penalty. I chastised the kid. I told him that was unacceptable. Gosh, for some kids who don't get attention, any attention at all will suffice as rewarding. Or perhaps the student didn't like our chastisement, probably not, but the other kids chuckled at the behavior. And that was reinforcing to that student. So we've got to look at the A and the B and the C. And where the previous slide, after the C, said finish, no, there's a whole series of ABCs going on in any behavioral situation. Each letter for each person is also a letter for the other person. So let's see. The antecedent for the student's B, behavior, was our direction. And that refusal behavior, the B in the student's line, is actually an antecedent for us. That behavior of saying, I ain't doing this baby crap, okay, is an antecedent for us to engage in a behavior. You will get to work now or you will lose recess. That is a consequence for the student, but it is also an antecedent, a stimulus for the student to show the next behavior, which is the consequence for our first B, and so on and so forth, as the kid tells us to put our threats where the sun don't shine. I believe that's a sea cave on some tropical island. And of course, we build and strengthen the student-teacher bond, that those trust bonds between us, as mentioned earlier. We avoid those use of penalties and our caustic responses because we know if you're gonna, you got to like the messenger if you're going to listen to their message. Another thing we might do is show one of the many commercials from Thailand, which instead of just promoting a product, they promote social skills, a positive pro-social value system. So you can go to YouTube and you can look for Thai commercials, Thai, or tearjerker commercials, and they're really good. In fact, why not show one right now?
เขาจะได้อะไรถ้าเขาทำแบบนี้ทุกวันเขาจะไม่ได้อะไรเลยไม่ได้รวยขึ้นไม่ได้ออกทีวีไม่มีใครรู้จักไม่ได้มีชื่อเสียงที่มากขึ้นเพราะสิ่งที่เขาได้คือได้แค่ความรู้สึกได้เห็นความสุขได้เข้าใจ ได้ความรักได้ในสิ่งที่เงินซื้อไม่ได้ได้โลกที่สวยงามกว่าเดิมในชีวิตคุณอะไรคือสิ่งที่คุณต้องการมากที่สุด
Inspirational, no? There are a whole lot of these commercials that can be found on the YouTube channel. Now, if the learner makes fun of some aspect of those Thai videos, perhaps we agree a tad bit while the student makes fun of them, but then we turn the talk to how those same principles, the ones presented in the video, would play out in their neighborhood and their school. What are the universal values and the social norms presented in the videos? Oh, and there are so many other free videos for our values clarification sessions. There's cartoons, excerpts from movies, and more for all the age groups and all the developmental levels. It's just a search on the internet that will find them. Some other pre-contemplation stage interventions. Well, we can arrange for the learner to chat with individuals with whom that student can identify, perhaps by race, culture, gender, language ability, etc., etc., etc. But meeting with somebody who has turned their life around and can say, I've been there. I've been where you are, and you can make a difference in your own life. And we discuss the pros and the cons of changing. But let's take a look at an example of each. Now, here's an example of chatting with somebody who's been there. It's a recollection of an elder gentleman who looks back at the teacher who gave encouragement, advice, guidance, and support. This is a type of person who can pass it forward rather than pay back, pass forward, share this with others. Now, you can pause this video if you want to read it in its entirety, but let's move forward to that listing of the pros and cons of changing one's ways. Again, we construct a grid, this one composed a bit differently than the one previously shown. And the columns are the advantages of change and the disadvantages, and the rows are of not changing and changing. We address the subtopics in the indicated order. And why was that? Why do we do it in that order? That's right. We want to utilize the recency effect, knowing that we humans tend to remember and reflect upon the last thing that was addressed. We want the discussion to end with the benefits of undertaking and continuing pro-social change. Gosh, there's so much more to discuss, but you're now fairly knowledgeable regarding the Transtheoretical Model for Change and how it can be adapted to educational settings. I am particularly interested in your thoughts regarding this presentation and the model that was presented. So, gosh, let me know what you are thinking. There's the contact information down there at the bottom. And if you're interested in various resources to help you with the implementation of the model's practices, contact me. Now, we can't put the information and the links in the video, but check the video's description. I'll see if I can place some active links in there, or at least URLs that then you can copy and paste into the search engine of your computer. Now, if that attempt to place this information into the description of the video, then please contact me directly. Well, that's it for now. Thank you greatly for joining me here today. Keep teaching them well. Goodbye. Inspiring, yes. There's a whole lot of these commercials, tearjerker commercials, again, on the YouTube channel. And, we inspiring, no? There are a whole lot of these wonderful commercials you can find them on YouTube. Inspirational, no? There are a whole lot of these commercials that can be found on the YouTube channel. Now, if the learner makes fun of some aspect of those Thai videos, perhaps we agree a tad bit while the student makes fun of them, but then we turn the talk to how those same principles, the ones presented in the video, would play out in their neighborhood and their school. What are the universal values and the social norms presented in the videos? Oh, and there are so many other free videos for our values clarification sessions. There's cartoons, excerpts from movies, and more for all the age groups and all the developmental levels. It's just a search on the internet that will find them. Some other pre-contemplation stage interventions. Well, we can arrange for the learner to chat with individuals with whom that student can identify, perhaps by race, culture, gender, language ability, etc., etc., etc. But meeting with somebody who has turned their life around and can say, I've been there. I've been where you are, and you can make a difference in your own life. And we discuss the pros and the cons of changing. Well, let's take a look at an example of each. Now, here's an example of chatting with somebody who's been there. It's a recollection of an elder gentleman who looks back at the teacher who gave encouragement, advice, guidance, and support. This is the type of person who can pass it forward rather than pay back, pass forward, share this with others. Now, you can pause this video if you want to read it in its entirety, but let's move forward to that listing of the pros and cons of changing one's ways. Again, we construct a grid, this one composed a bit differently than the one previously shown. And the columns are the advantages of change and the disadvantages, and the rows are of not changing and changing. We address the subtopics in the indicated order. And why was that? Why do we do it in that order? That's right. We want to utilize the recency effect, knowing that we humans tend to remember and reflect upon the last thing that was addressed. We want the discussion to end with the benefits of undertaking and continuing pro-social change. Gosh, there's so much more to discuss, but you're now fairly knowledgeable regarding the trans-theoretical model for change and how it can be adapted to educational settings. I am particularly interested in your thoughts regarding this presentation and the model that was presented. So, gosh, let me know what you are thinking. There's the contact information down there at the bottom. And if you're interested in various resources to help you with the implementation of the model's practices, contact me. Now, we can't put the information and the links in the video, but check the video's description. I'll see if I can place some active links in there, or at least URLs that then you can copy and paste into the search engine of your computer. Now, if that attempt to place that into this information into the description of the video, then please contact me directly. Well, that's it for now. Thank you greatly for joining me here today. Keep teaching them well. Goodbye.